Welcome to everyone as you come on in. I'm going to give it just a moment or two to fill in as you were all in a waiting room. So,
hi, Sarah. This is Wendy.
Hi, Wendy. How are you?
I'm fine. How are you?
I am good.
Good.
So we're going to get started in just a moment.
Okay, great.
So let's see, we're about a minute in. There we go. It looks pretty good. So thank you to all of you who are here in the gallery. I obviously can't see you, but you can see me. And our speaker today is Ray Goodrich for the Ask the Expert Adventures in Innovation seminar series that is hosted by the CCTSI, Venture Partners, and CSU Ventures for Colorado State University. We also want to thank the NIH Research Evaluation and Commercialization Hubs grant that at CU Anschutz that helps fund this experience. So today's speaker is Ray Goodrich. He is our executive director of the Infectious Disease Research Center at CSU, and he has a very laudable background history. I'm going to let him tell you more about that when he goes into his journey today. Generally speaking, the Q&A is open for you to put in questions, and we will try to field them within the bounds of the conversation and get answers to any of those. So I encourage all of you to be wonderfully active on there so that we can have a good conversation with Dr. Goodrich. And in the meantime, I forgot to introduce myself on top of all of this. I am Sarah Hibbs-Ship, the Managing Director of Communications for the Colorado State University Research Foundation. And the Tech Transfer Office, known as CSU Ventures, is a division of the Research Foundation. So I look forward to all of your questions. And Ray, just briefly to describe Ray, he's been in medical research for over 29 years, is now working, came to us from Tarumo, BCT, and is now our executive director, as I mentioned, of the Infectious Disease Research Center. And just in the few years I have worked with Ray, he has spun out 2 startup companies and continued to be a highly innovative force at CSU. So Ray, I'm going to hand it over to you to fill that out a little bit and start with your entrepreneurial journey. So.
Well, thank you, Sarah. Thank you for inviting me, and it really is a pleasure to be here today. I think, as you mentioned, I've been here now at CSU as of October 1st of this year for 5 years. I came in October of 2016, and prior to that, spent about 30 years in industry. Not exactly how I had mapped out, I would say, my career. If you had asked me in days when I was an undergraduate student, a high school student, an undergraduate student, and a graduate student, what I wanted to do and where I wanted to go, I would have probably given you the same answer consistently of working in academia, being a professor at a university, doing research and medical related research. And it wasn't until I got to graduate school at Caltech in the mid to late 80s that I was sort of bitten by the entrepreneurial bug. I had a mentor there who was my faculty advisor named John Baldishweiler, who was in the chemistry department at Caltech, and that was my background. My undergrad was in chemistry from The Ohio State University, and my graduate degree was in biophysical chemistry from Caltech. And John was one of those people who sort of had a hand and a role in many different things. He was very innovative and very entrepreneurial himself, responsible for founding a number of companies. One of those was called Vestar, which local people in Colorado may know as Nexstar. Which was actually put together from Nexogen and Vestar in the or I think it was in the 1990s, with a company that Larry Gold had started here. They were kind of merged together and created a company. But John was very entrepreneurial. And my second year in graduate school, I was working on a project that it had to do with blood preservation and ways of preserving proteins and blood products in a frozen or freeze-dried state. And he came to me and said, so I talked to some of the people who have backed my ventures in a couple of different areas, and they're interested in starting a company around some of the ideas you're working on and some of the things you're doing here in your graduate program. And literally on a Sunday afternoon, I think after a football game, and it wasn't Caltech's football team, by the way. They don't have much of a football team. But John had invited me over to watch a game, and then afterwards met a gentleman named Neil Diver, who was from the local business community there in Los Angeles. And really, again, just someone who was a terrific mentor to me on the business side. And we formed the company, first company that I was a co-founder of, really driven by the two of them from a business perspective and my input on the technical side. And I used that as a learning opportunity. And suddenly my interest began to shift from going sort of the academic route to going into industry. And that was a first foray into the field. We had excellent backing from a venture capital firm called Warburg Pincus, a very big firm out of New York. And they supported us in the development programs that we had. And the company actually was called CryoPharm. We were doing the blood preservation, and then about 3 to 4 years into the company, we actually started a second program in blood sterilization or blood treatment processes to prevent transfusion transmitted diseases. So all of the technology was around blood, either preserving it or preventing it from causing disease transmission. And this was, from a period of time when we were still reeling, I think, the medical community and the world in general, from HIV and the blood supply and all the issues that were fraught with that. We built the company up over a number of years, and as I say, I used that as a learning opportunity. I had some great mentors, and mentors I think are important in everyone's life. My mentor at Ohio State was a chemistry professor named Matthew Platts, and became one of my dearest friends and closest consultants in all of the companies that I've ever been involved in. And I think it emphasizes, the importance of those kinds of relationships and interactions and making the most out of them. There's a lot of effort and a lot of time that people put into, working with students, working with, as I was at that time, working with people who are just starting their careers. And that's a lesson that I've tried to carry forward and do the same, kind of pay it forward to people who have interests and want to pursue some of these activities for themselves in their careers and their lives. But we spent about 9 to 10 years working in that environment. And about 6 years into it, 6 or 7 years into it, we ended up selling essentially half the company's technology portfolio to an organization here in Colorado. And that started my Colorado connection. Company was called COBE BCT, based in Lakewood, Colorado, and got to meet many of the people who were doing the due diligence and technical reviews at the time for the company. And we sold that portion, the blood preservation, blood solutions kind of technology to COBE in, I believe it was 1993. And we did tech transfer for the next 3 years. We continued with the blood sterilization technology for another 3 years. And in 1996, we ended up closing up shop and selling off that IP portfolio to a company called Baxter Healthcare Baxter International in Chicago, very large healthcare organization. There were some interesting experiences in that. I had lived at that point for about 9 years, from about 87 to 96, actually 9 years. I'd lived that period of my life, what I say, living on 6-month plans, because we were always out sort of raising the next 6 months worth of money, and had several occasions where, we're sitting around in my office on a Friday wondering if we have enough money to keep the lights and the doors open on Monday. And it was interesting. The thing I saw in that small company environment was a lot of great ideas, never enough money to pursue all of them to the extent that we wanted. And it was interesting when I went to larger companies later in my career. I found that it was an interesting situation, a lot of great ideas and never enough money to pursue all of them. So there's a lot of commonality there in terms of whether you're a big company or a small company, what you're able to do and what areas you're able to focus on and really drive towards. But in 96, as we were winding things down, Ed Wood, who was president of co-BCT at the time, saw me at a national meeting in Seattle. I think it was American Society of Hematology. And he came up to me and said, well, I hear you guys are closing shop down there in California, in Pasadena. Would you be interested in coming to work for us in Lakewood, Colorado? And he said, I don't know what your title would be. I don't know what your job responsibilities would be. I don't know, exactly what you'd be working on, but we'd very much like you to come and work with us in Colorado. And at first I thought, how could I turn an offer down like that? But for a pretty open door. I thought about it for a while, and what was interesting, the Warburg Pincus at the time had wanted me to kind of pick up roots in California and go to New York and be involved with a new startup that was being spun out from the New York Blood Center at the time. And, after 9 years, as I say, living on the 6-month plan and seeing where we brought the technology to a certain point, but then we couldn't bring it further, I wanted to experience what life was like on the other side of the table. I wanted to see what it was like in an organization that had manufacturing, that had clinical, that had regulatory, that had products, and to learn all of that piece of it, and see how they did it. And so the opportunity in New York was another startup, spin out kind of opportunity, and I wanted something a little different. So I ended up taking the job in Lakewood, Colorado with co-BCT. Really a terrific group of people, some of whom are still there today, from when I joined back in 1996. Frank Corbin was one of the people who recruited me there. And, I really liked the organization. They were, I think, about 100 million in sales at the time. And so they had, it was a small to medium size biomedical company at the time, but they were growing at a phenomenal rate, and they really had a terrific reputation. And I thought, I'll go there and I'll spend a couple of years. I'll learn everything that I can, and then I'll be on my way. And I ended up spending 20 years there in various capacities. I came in, sort of being a co-founder and a senior vice president in a small company of about 50 to 60 people, to being a therapy scientist. So I was starting at the bottom rung, sort of of the ladder, but it was an incredible learning experience for me. And I took it as that, and I took that as the opportunity I was going to have to be there. And I never regretted it. About 2 years into the time I was there, so around 1998, maybe 1999, both Frank Corbin and Ed Wood came to me and said, what do you know about pathogen reduction technologies for blood products? And I had two thoughts immediately. I said, first of all, I hope they don't see my name on those patents we just sold to to Baxter because they were now owned by one of their biggest competitors, Baxter, at the time. And the other thought was, well, this would be interesting because when we sold off that original portfolio, we had sort of taken it to a point where I think myself and many of my colleagues believed that we had gone about as far as we could go with it. And there were some real challenges and some real issues. And I think I remember very distinctly in Chicago, one of the last meetings I attended on behalf of that organization, they had about 40, Baxter brought together about 40 different consultants into the room. And at the end of my presentation, where I was talking about the technology and sort of what we had run into and some of the issues we had run into, someone, I think, in the audience raised their hand and said, well, are you telling us that you think that, this is done, that there's no way to advance the technology further? And I was thinking, well, I'm glad they already signed the deal. But my answer was, well, no, I think that it can go further. I just can't tell you where that is today. I think that, we've learned a lot. We've learned things that have not worked. We've learned things that might work, which we just really didn't have the resources or ability to pursue. And that's sort of where it is. I think every experiment tells you something, whether it works the way you wanted it to work or it works in a very fundamentally different way. There's information there that you can use to design the next experiment and to use that series of experiments to design perhaps a new product or a new feature to a product that you're working on. And so I left that environment, and I left with a lot of ideas about, and stayed actively thinking, even though I was working at BCT on some very fundamentally different things related to stem cell transplantation and therapies for cancer. I kept thinking about the blood safety piece and where we did things that, having learned what we learned, how we might have done those differently. And so I wrote up a 2-page white paper. I think I still have a copy of that went in my notebook at the time. And I gave that to Ed Wood and Frank Corbin and other members of the executive management team there at COBE at the time. And I said, if this is what I think we should give as a try, and here's why I think that it might have some utility. And they looked at me and said, go do it. And it was literally myself, and we hired one tech to go into the lab and start trying this out. And that was the genesis and the birth of the Mirasol pathogen reduction technology, which utilizes riboflavin and UV light to inactivate pathogens in blood. So this was around 1999-2000 timeframe. And we worked on that internal to the company. We actually formed a company, which was sort of my second startup, formed a company within the company. It was a group called Navigant Biotechnologies. It was a little bit different than it had been in the past, where we were out seeking, venture capital financing. The funding was coming from proceeds from operation from within the BCT organization at the time. We still had a plan, I think, at that point in the early days of spinning it out, but ultimately the parent company to BCT, Gambro, which was based in Sweden, never wanted to spin it out. They wanted to keep it as part of the organization and part internal. So Navigant operated like a separate entity on the same campus in Lakewood, Colorado, but it was fully under and financed by the parent BCT organization, co-BCT, Gambro BCT, ultimately Caridian BCT. And so we spent about 5 to 7 years developing the technology, a lot of testing, a lot of programs, really a wonderful opportunity as well, I think, and a lesson learned in my career of how important it is for different functions and different capabilities and different perspectives and talents to work on a project that, like this, massive implications, in this case for blood safety, but required so many different talents and viewpoints and perspectives. Every part was essential: regulatory, clinical, scientific, marketing, sales. They were all critical in identifying, a program of this size and scope. And fortunately, in end of 2007, I think it was around November of 2007. So we're coming up on, I think, what is it now? Almost 15 years, 14, 15 years. That in November of 2007, the product received a CE mark and went commercial in Europe. And it's been in continuous use ever since. It's still today, places around the world. I think they just got approvals in Canada and started implementation in India. Big programs going on in sub-Saharan Africa. And again, it was just an incredible experience, I think, working with teams from around the world to be able to implement something like this. In 2011, Terumo Corporation acquired the BCT organization, and you had Terumo Transfusion Medicine, you had Caridian BCT, as it was known at the time, and you had Navigant Biotechnologies, and essentially all of those were folded into a single organization. And I stayed on as the chief scientific officer for that combined organization and the vice president of scientific and clinical affairs. And I told David Perez, who was my boss at the time, that this was by far the toughest assignment I ever had. In the past, it was always new construction. Here's a piece of land, go build something, or here are the blueprints, this is what it should look like, but it was new. And what he was asking me to do was to go into several organizations now. And I said it was the equivalent, David, of asking me to move into a house I was remodeling. And I had to remodel all of the bathrooms. So there were no working bathrooms, the kitchen, there was no roof, it was raining outside, and the prior tenants were still there insisting that 1970s wallpaper looked terrific. So it was challenging and interesting, but it was also it was a fabulous experience. And again, seeing the teams of people that were there within all the organizations, the Terumo, the Navigant Biotechnologies, and the Caridian BCT, it was really a fascinating experience doing that, which I did for 5 years from 2011 to 2016, and decided that I wanted to finally get to what I originally had started off thinking as a high school student and an undergraduate and a graduate student, what I originally wanted to do, which was to go into the academic world. I had a very unique experience throughout my career of being able to publish and present at different scientific conferences, the work that myself and my colleagues were doing, my lab did, and the people in my lab did. It was a very unique experience, but it really kind of satisfied that inner craving that I had for the research aspect. Some of it very basic, a lot of it very translational, but I kept my foot in that door over time. And so, it was interesting, when I was in industry, I sought out academic collaborations. And now being in academia, I seek out corporate and private sector collaborations and interactions, because I think what I've come to realize over the years is that although there are great differences among these communities, there is a lot of common ground. And that common ground is a desire on both parts to do something and contribute something from the work that's being done that improves the human condition. It might improve it by making new basic knowledge available about how something works in the world from a basic science perspective. It might improve it by delivering a product, a solution, a new diagnostic, a new therapeutic, a new vaccine into the world when those kinds of things are needed the most. But I think that common ground and I think if you realize that common ground, we drive towards different purposes and different goals for different reasons. Research and education in an academic environment, commercial success in the commercial environment. But there is common ground, and that is working on things that make a difference, a positive difference in people's lives. And it's really that partnership, which I feel very strongly about, between industry and academia that that offers us the opportunity to be able to work together towards solutions to problems that people who are our stakeholders, whether you're in the public or the private sector, the public is our stakeholders, working on problems and working on solutions to problems that our stakeholders have. So when the opportunity came up, I turned in my resignation at BCT on a Monday. I remember very clearly. And David Perez, I think, was in complete shock. And he was saying, "What are you going to do? Where are you going to go?" And I said, "I really have no idea." I really had no other plans at the time. I had been, I have a great friend I've known for 35 years, Alan Rudolph, who's the vice president of research here at Colorado State University, and had worked with the people up here, Dick Bowen in particular, at Colorado State University in several projects. And so I knew Dick and his group, and I knew a little bit about CSU and the infectious disease work going on here. And literally, I decided to give Alan a call because we had wanted to get the families together. We've been close personal friends for many, many years. And we hadn't had a chance to do that. I was traveling in Africa, he was traveling in Asia, and we didn't have a chance to. Well, I thought, what the heck? I've got extra time now, probably on my hands. I'm going to give him a call and see if, this would be a good time. And in the course of that conversation, I told him, "Hey, I'm moving on from BCT. I turned in my resignation yesterday." And he was like, "Well, you won't believe this, but just yesterday, the state authorized us to open up the posting for the executive director of the Infectious Disease Research Center. And would you be interested?" And this was like in July of 2016. And I said, "Yeah, love to learn more about it." And then, long story short, I ended up getting the position and coming here. But Alan told me that the minute that he told me that that I told him that I might be interested in the position, he said, I called the headhunter that we had just talked to hiring to find this position, told them that in New York, and told them, "I think we have someone, so we won't need your services." I told him, and he said he didn't tell me at the time because that wouldn't have been good negotiating status. And I said, "Well, Alan, I didn't tell you at the time, but what you described is what I would say is my dream job." So that would have been bad negotiating status. But I ended up coming here starting October of 2016. And one of the things that I wanted to do was really be able to pursue some applications of technology that while working in the corporate world, I just didn't have the opportunity to pursue. And that's one aspect, I think, again, as I say, in the corporate world, you really have to be laser focused on certain projects and programs, and you have to look at them from the timeline and return on investment aspects of it. In the academic world, you still have those kinds of considerations, but the discovery and the invention piece is, finding out new things that you could share with the world and that you can help to develop into new products and services is highly emphasized. And I really wanted to be able to pursue some things that over the years I thought would be tremendous opportunities in vaccine production and cancer immunotherapy. And the company that I worked for at the time just, wasn't that they didn't see the potential there or have the insights. It's that they had other things to do. They had other fish to fry, so to speak. And so I wanted to take those up. And so my first couple of years here, I think I was 6 months or 7 months on site. And I went to a scientific state of the science symposium here with the posters at CSU. And I saw a poster by Dr. Amanda Guth, and she was talking about some of the work she was doing in cancer immunology. And I remember I was so intrigued. You know, I stood there at the poster for quite some time and no one came by. And ultimately I left my car there. And I said, you know, I really wanted to talk to her about the work that she was doing and some of the things, you know, what her experience had been and an area that I thought, you know, there might be some applications to technology. And again, another lesson in that, you know, having the opportunity to participate in those kinds of things, seminars, symposia, poster sessions, and opportunities to interact with colleagues and colleagues in particular with different backgrounds and different skill sets and training. What ended up happening is that became the start of what ultimately turned into my next startup, Photon Pharma, and developing cancer immunotherapy applications, cell therapy applications with some of the technology that originally started with the concepts behind the blood preservation and blood treatment. And I'm sorry, my dog barking in the background here. Someone came and rang the doorbell at the front of the house. But my wife is getting him under control. His bark is definitely worse than his bite. So, but anyhow, we wanted to pursue those. So we started a company. We had filed the IP at Colorado State University with the CSU Ventures Group. We ended up licensing that exclusively back into Photon Pharma. I called in some colleagues that I had worked with in the past in starting Navigant here in Colorado as part of the BCT organization, and said, you know, would this be something you'd be interested in? Because again, I think realizing your limitations and seeking out those resources where people have other skill sets and other abilities to bring in, it's an important part of, I think, any new startup and any new endeavor. To realize that and not try to do it all yourself or within a small group or just from the technical perspective, but to think about it from the business and development perspective as well. That was going well. We started that in 2018. And then, of course, at the end of 2019 and 2020, the world was struck by SARS-CoV-2 and COVID-19. And one of the things we had been doing in the cancer therapy was thinking about ways that we could use this technology platform, this photochemical method, to create, in that case, cell therapy-based applications for cancer. But I had also, as I mentioned, been interested for many, many years in applying this to the development of vaccine preparations. And so I got together with colleagues here at CSU, another one of those examples, I think, of working with people with diverse backgrounds and capabilities. Dick Bowen and his group with the animal models, Marcela Haneo Tomeo and her group on the flow cytometry and immunology programs that her group has worked on, Mark Stenglein with next-gen sequencing, Brendan Podell with the pathology work. And we formed a group and we went after funding from BARDA and from BARDA and from the NIH. We submitted proposals, and I was very pleased to see that both of those were accepted. Both those contracts ended up being accepted. And I think the total, when you combine both the base funding and option funding, the totals on all of those contracts is well over $23 million, which gives us an opportunity to really develop this technology further through the point of phase 1 clinical trials. And that, of course, is dependent on us meeting milestones and the needs still existing. It's more the demonstration of the platform capabilities than it is any particular vaccine formulation of and by itself. And that technology, by the way, also was IP that we had filed at Colorado State University's Ventures Group. And then that IP ended up being licensed by a group called VIC, Venture Group Development Corporation. And they formed a new company just recently called Solaris Vaccines Inc. And so we're off with that as a sort of, I think, the fourth now startup that through my career I've been engaged in. Everyone is new, everyone is different, everyone has something new to teach you, to learn from, new mistakes to be made, to learn from, new successes to be celebrated and enjoyed. And I think, I'm very excited about the opportunities with these while continuing, to work on and discover and publish and present some of the data with that goal, as I say, a common goal of wanting to deliver things that improve the human condition, that make people's lives better so that we don't have to worry about diseases in the future to the extent that we have and most likely will continue to face as challenges to come. That's really what it's all about. And I think at the end of the day, that's what we're all left with, what we did and what we tried to do. And so that was your first question. Did you have a second one?
I do. And for any of you in the audience, please feel free to add some questions in. Your experiences, Ray, are phenomenal in that they cross, well, they're applicable to a wide range of disciplines. And as you think academically, while we are moving into an age of increased desire for collaboration and cross-disciplinary teams, historically, academic training is much more, I think, about figure out how to do it yourself and do all of it yourself with some grad students. And so it's an interesting.
Yeah, I apologize if you have some background noise, by the way, because it turns out it just so happens it looks like we have a microwave being delivered here.
Oh, very nice. While your kitchen is being remodeled.
Yeah. So and there was no notification in advance. Yeah. So that's.
But thinking about that, and you place a significant emphasis on building the team, and knowing when your expertise is insufficient in certain areas that you need to bring in other experts or other folks with that core competency. Can you talk a little bit about how you select team members or build the right team, or even figuring out how to have the realization that that's not your area of expertise and accepting that you need help?
Well, I think that's important, to understand, again, and that's just a personal thing in terms of understanding your own limitations and not trying to do it all. I think the other aspect is that starting a company is easy. It really is. Keeping a company going and seeing the success come out the other end. I think I told you about two experiences with two startups, 9 years in the first case, to 1999 to about 2011 in the second case, so 12 years there. Those are, that's the kind of time frames that you're talking about to get things to a level. So there's a lot of work and a lot of commitment. So I think what you look for in people are people who are willing, it's not a quick get rich scheme at all. It's a lot of hard work. It's a lot of effort that has to be put in. And it's a willingness to, for people to commit that time, to commit that energy, because they believe in the dream, because they have a passion for what you're trying to do collectively as a group. Those are the kind of folks that you want to have in your corner when you're out there trying to do things that change the world for the better. You have to have people who are committed, who believe in what you're trying to do, who share the vision and the hopes that you have relative to delivering something of value into the world. those are aspects. I think CSU really does a wonderful job in terms of some of the team building programs and opportunities that is studying this as a science in some of the groups that exist here on campus, and the dynamics of how those groups interact with one another, how people within those groups interact with one another, what works, what doesn't work, and the science behind it. And I think that will be increasingly important as we see and continue to experience a lot of the problems that are ahead of us, whether it's climate change and ways to improve the environment, ways to address issues of social justice and equity among our communities. So social sciences to the atmospheric sciences and climate to medicine and biology. The problems are big, and they require big teams and lots of minds and lots of hands to work on them, I think, in ways that are going to be successful. So that dynamic of how to build teams, how to motivate teams, how to focus teams, how to get the most out of those teams working together is going to become only increasingly important as we progress.
That is excellent. We have a couple of questions from the audience at the moment, and one of them really sort of falls into this concept. You had mentioned in your first startup company, right? You're on a 6-month cycle, like every 6 months. Do I have enough money? Which in some ways is very similar to academic grant funding, right? You only have money as long as your next grant as long as you have that next grant coming in.
That's correct.
But there's also a level of success that faculty are pretty used to, whether you get publications in, right? You graduate grad students, things get to go on your CV and you have accomplishment. But entrepreneurship is a longer road. If you think, you said 9 years
Yes.
for the first one.
Yeah.
Do you have any tips for the audience on how to deal with that uncertainty and how to keep the long goal in mind as you just continue to work through the struggles of getting to the point where it's successful?
Well, I think you take the little victories and celebrate those along the way on that long journey, and celebrate those together collectively as a group, because those are the kinds, and the interactions that you have, those are the kinds of things that get you through the tougher times, which are definitely going to be a part of any long-term program or project that people work together on. And I think there's a sense of perseverance that comes with perseverance in a good cause. It's like I was saying, you have to understand what your goals are. If your goals are to do something that fundamentally changes perhaps the way things are done today or offers a new way to do things, there are incredible challenges that come, and they aren't just technical in nature. There are lots of projects, I'm sure, and products and other things that I'm familiar with that were wonderful technology, but they just didn't make it, for one reason or another. Sometimes it's because the resources weren't available, despite the best efforts of those to go out and find them. Sometimes it was just simply the world may not have been ready for it. There's an old story, when I was at Caltech writing my thesis, I wrote it on a Xerox microcomputer. And most people would say, well, Xerox, what the heck was that? But most people don't know, they invented one of the first operating systems. They invented the first mouse that was used with, a laptop computer. Why didn't they make it? Why didn't they transition, that technology? Why did the market eventually get, eaten up by first Apple and then IBM personal computers? They had the ideas, they had the thoughts, but for some reason it just didn't transition into the commercial piece. So there are potential pitfalls all through the development cycle when you're with a new company, and you have to have a perseverance, you have to have a vision, and you have to have a commitment to that vision. I think, and also an acceptance of the fact that despite all the great things that you may do, it may just never come to fruition. My first startup cryofarm, the blood preservation technology, it never got commercialized. The ideas ended up getting used in many other products by many other people after they came off patent. But the company never really commercialized the product platform. To me, it was successful because of all the new stuff we discovered and then the subsequent applications that have come out from it. And that's sometimes good enough. Didn't have, the huge financial rewards, didn't have the satisfaction of seeing product on the shelf with a label on it that came from the company that we started. But there was a lot of good work that was done by a lot of good people over the years to bring the concepts and the technology forward, which are being utilized today in many different sectors for tissue and cell and protein preservation. So I think it's a perseverance, and I think it's a setting of expectations that's important, and it's creating that bond with the people that and that common vision with the people that you're working with, of what you're working on together collectively to achieve.
So thinking about that, and very early on, you mentioned how much mentors and mentorship played a vital role in your career, and I'm guessing also that many of the individuals who you worked with in your first startup you're still in contact with.
Yes, absolutely.
Can you talk a little bit, branch out on that concept of mentoring and mentorship and networking effectively so that you maintain the connections of your network?
Yeah, I think those have been incredibly important to me throughout my life and career. Going back to high school, Mr. Jones, who was my biology teacher, who worked with me on a science fair project and helped to stimulate the interest that I had in that area, to Matt Platts as an undergraduate, who gave me my first job in science, which I tell people was changing the oil in vacuum pumps in the chemistry lab. That was my first job in science. But, and then he ultimately went on to give me my first job actually working in the lab, doing as an undergraduate, because I did that dirty, messy, smelly job that most people didn't want to do, but I did it to the best of my ability, and I didn't complain, at least when he was around. But it was, and Matt's been a lifelong friend of mine and someone that I constantly went back to, said, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? And I think importantly, what's important in those relationships is you have to have sometimes people around you who tell you things that you don't want to hear, but you need to hear. And they could be honest with you, and they could be honest in a forthright way when they think you're not following the right path or you're doing something incorrect, that they could tell you about that, and they could tell you about that in a way that they're telling you because they want you to succeed. And it's up to you then what you do with that information, how you process it and how you apply it to your life or your career. John Balderschweiler at Caltech, was one of those people. First project that I started working on in his lab as a graduate student wasn't really going anywhere. And Caltech's an interesting environment. Everything rides on the success of your project, whether you get your PhD or not. So I'm a year into my program there, and I'm just totally panicked that, this isn't working out. And I went to him, and here I am, this guy just coming out of undergrad. And I go to him and I sit down in his office and I tell him the project that he gave me isn't going to work. And I think, if some people would have sat there and said, well, hammered me and said, what do you mean it's not going to work? You go in there, you know. And John sat back and said, well, okay. He said, that's the idea I had. I'll tell you what, if you have a better one, go do it and I'll support you. And that ended up being the project that turned into the first company that we together spun out from Caltech. So it, you know, was that willingness, that openness. And by the way, even though he said, you know, you go figure it out, every once in a while he would slip me a few manuscripts and papers that he had read and said, well, you know, think about this kind of thing. So it was that freedom and, you know, giving people the opportunity, the chance to succeed or to fail, but helping them along the way. In industry, you know, it was people like Neil Diver taught me about business and issues associated with that. It was people like Teresa Ayers, who was the general manager and present CEO for Navigant Biotechnologies, and probably, you know, one of the best, if not the best boss I ever had. She was just incredibly insightful and, you know, showed an example to me of how to be a leader in that kind of a small biotech. Frank Corbin at the BCT organization, who helped me get situated in the corporate world of a different kind from what I came out of the startup and went to work at BCT. And I could go on and on and on, you know, with people. And those are, you know, those experiences that you have over time. As I say, those are things that I took to heart, and I see with students today, or with individuals who are just starting down that track where I was 30 years ago, and knowing what that experience was like for me, and knowing how important it was to have people who would take time out of their schedules and take time out of the things that they were doing and the busy, you know, whirlwind that was happening around them, to help educate, train, and give me their advice and give me their guidance. And that's something that, as I say, I try to mimic in paying forward to others as well. But I tell people all the time, I was saying in a book that I read, I wish I remember who the author was, but it's always hold people in their highest potential. And it's sort of the equivalent of saying, give them the benefit of the doubt. And that comes from you know, the people that are working for you as your bosses and supervisors, and the people who work for you when you're in the role of a supervisor or a boss. Give people, you know, hold them in their highest potential and work with them to hope and to try to see them realize that potential in their lives and in their careers.
That is a lovely thought, actually. So now how many of us are going to be Googling that sort of quote to see if we can find who wrote it? Right?
I have the book somewhere here in my bookshelf. I'll have to go and I think it's like the other 90% or something like that. Tells a wonderful story in there about a jazz pianist who was Art Tatum, who was able to play music and certain compositions that very few people ever have been able to play. And the amazing story behind it, of course, is that he was blind for most of his life, if not his entire life. And that didn't stop him from doing what he wanted to do and achieving it, and not just achieving it, but knocking it out of the park in terms of capability. So I'll find that. Maybe I could send it to you in a chat or an email or something.
That would be lovely. We have enough time to do one final question. And to those of you who have submitted questions, thank you so much. These are great questions. Stephanie is asking, the pressure to produce can sometimes be overwhelming, and at least in academia, right? Conventional definitions of productivity may not jive for innovation. Can you talk a little bit about reframing our thoughts on productivity to allow for innovation?
Yeah, it's a very interesting question. And, you know, again, I think it's also how you define productivity. And particularly in the academic environment, to me, productivity is not just measured in the grant dollars necessarily that we bring in, but it should be measured in the students we train and educate, the opportunities that we create for them to get experiences, whether they're from additional academic opportunities or from relationships and internships with private sector companies. When I first came to CSU, we had this group at the Research Innovation Center, and we had multiple groups there, and there had been a history that had gone on for many years before my arrival. And one of the questions in people's minds was, how can we be more successful? And my answer, after 6 months looking at how things were working, what wasn't, is the beauty of it is that you get to define success. And to me, as I said, success are our students finding opportunities by interfacing with private sector groups, our faculty getting benefits through sponsored research or other collaborative agreements that bring the best of what they have to offer, their skill sets, their knowledge, to apply to problems that are of interest more broadly in the public and in the private sector. Those are success. Are we working on problems that solve issues of great human need? That's success. I know the pressure is always, the comment could be, that's how I may feel about it, but what does my boss or my boss's boss think about it? And they're saying, I need those publications, I need grant money. And those are important, but I would say that the former generates the latter and not the other way around. If you can define for yourself what represents success, and you could define that and you can work toward that, then the grants come, then the funding comes, then the publications come. If you're working on things that are of great interest to you and to the community at large, if you're solving problems, those things happen as a consequence. I don't think it goes the other way around. If you start off by saying, I'm going to get this paper, I'm going to get that grant, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be successful in getting there through the other things, where sometimes those are the things that really matter. Are giving opportunities to students, giving opportunities to faculty, and working on problems that are important to the community at large. It sounds, and it may be, a simplification of a very complex problem, but I think you have to start there by defining those things for yourself of what represents success, and then putting your best efforts towards going out and trying to attain that.
That is Stephanie, thank you for that question. That is a wonderful ending note, that sometimes it's not about meeting somebody else's goals, right? But that it's, as Ray so eloquently said, is it solving a problem that has a real human need? And does working toward that get you the successful metrics that you need to sort of reframe that idea about productivity and the time it takes to be innovative? So
right.
We have a minute left, and so I want to thank everyone, and especially you, Ray, for taking time out today. This was a lovely seminar, and I very much appreciate it. And those of you who put in questions, very insightful, and thank you so much for taking the risk to ask the question. So you can all find Ray at the IDRC here at CSU. The common email, Raymond, I think it's actually ray.goodrich
yes.
At Colorado State.
Yes, ray.goodrich at colorado-state.edu.
And we look forward to our next session. Thank you all very much, and have a lovely day.
Take care, Sarah, and thank you.
You are welcome.